Good morning, viewers. Connor Hearn here with the Alliance of Dental Excellence. I'm seeing more and more people talking about the GDPR. More and more in forums, more and more on Facebook groups, and more people talking to me in person about GDPR. How is it going to affect their practice, how it's going to affect their marketing, how it's going to affect their patients, their business, everything. So, as I promised, I wanted to give you an update on my first GDPR video. I want to give you a second small update with some actions that you can actually do now in preparation for the GDPR. So, as we discussed before, it comes into effect of May 2018. That is when it is set in law. There's no leeway, there's no cooling period. We're sort of in that period now where we have to get everything ready for May, and we need to be up and running with GDPR, otherwise we're going to foul the plan, we're not going to be compliant. So GDPR, what is it? General Data Protection Regulations. It's coming in and it's really to make everything a lot easier in the world that we're living in today. It's a very digital, very technological age that we live in. So the EU have decided things need to change. Data protections that they got in place at the moment don't quite cut it. So the GDPR is coming in force. So how's it going to actually affect you in practice? I've made some notes so I don't lose my train of thought, and I want to give you some clear, precise instructions, and hopefully they're going to help you to start on the road for compliance. So firstly, I brought it out in the last video, but I want to bring it out again, that the data subject, or the patient in our case, is going to have the right to request their information free of charge. At the moment, I know lots of practices charge about £10 for supplying the information or getting copies of patient records and stuff like that. That's got to be scrapped from May 2018. That's scrapped, and patients have the right to access their information free of charge. It's their information, they have the right to access it. Okay, now how we use information, data subjects information. And the reason I call them data subject is because that's what they refer to under the guidelines of the GDPR. So a data subject's information, we need to record how we're going to use it, and I'll talk to you about how we can do that in a minute. We need to have proof of opt-in if we're doing marketing, and we've got some very key things of why that's so important. Even if you're not doing marketing at present, which is targeted to a patient, I'll explain how you can be affected on that. And you need to have proof of compliance at all steps to make sure that you are GDPR compliant. Now, so now we've discussed that they've already got free access to their information. Okay, how we use it needs to be recorded. So in a dental practice, the patient come in, they register with us, they fill in a medical history form, and they need to know how are we going to use that information. So what I would suggest is two things to start with. You really need to select a DPO, a data protections officer. That should potentially be a senior member of staff that can keep up with the regulations, keep up with the compliance, and knows all of the rules. So you get your data protections officer in place first of all, and then after that get your data protections officer to create a policy which will explain to patients how we're going to use their information as data controllers. So the data controller in this instance acts as the dental practice. So how is the dental practice going to use the data subjects information? Well, we're obviously going to use it for health reasons. We're going to use it to diagnose properly, to make sure if they're registered with us to complete the medical history, to make sure that we don't, use latex gloves in someone that's got a latex allergy. That's how we're using the information. We're not necessarily using it to be passed on to third parties and stuff like that. But so some practices out there will do marketing. So if you're doing email marketing, it needs to be clearly stated in the policy how you're going to use that information. Even if you're doing off-site backups, potentially you need to put that in your policy to say that we are using something called a data processor to store your information on a cloud, for example. But obviously that needs to be encrypted, it needs to be extremely safe, and this is why the GDPR is basically there. So make sure you're tying up the loose ends. Data protection officer, write a policy explaining how the practice, the data controller, is going to use the information and whether you're going to use any data processes. That way the data subject, the patient, has full information on how their information is being used. So what can you start doing now apart from writing that policy? And I would suggest potentially putting that policy up in your waiting rooms so patients have clear access to it. Now, what else can you do? We need to start recording that patients give us information and opted in on their own will. So if you're sending out email marketing, or even if you're putting a little subject at the end of your text message reminders or your email reminders, or even your recalls saying, did you know we did? Do you know we do? This month we've got special deals on. Unless you have their permission to actually market to them in that way, come May 25th, 2018, that's completely against the law. You can't do that anymore. So the best thing to do is to start to get them to sign forms now that will say that they understand, they want to opt in to X, Y, and Z, and you can lay out a nice little paragraph for them to actually sign that piece of paper. So it's another thing that a patient has to sign. It can't really be a tick box anymore. You need to have a signature on it, and they need to opt in. Now, why is it important if you're not doing marketing, if you don't put anything on your recalls, if you don't put anything on your text messages, and you don't send out any sort of like e-signs? Why is it important then? The reason it's important is, just think about the future. 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years time. If you want to go and sell that practice and a new buyer comes in and asks if your data protection regulations are up to scratch and you've never done the opt-in letters, potentially you're knocking a little bit of value off for that new owner. Because as things get more technological, they're going to want to send emails. Even if you don't do it now, somebody in the future will. So the best practice is to start now getting patient opt-in. Let's start doing that straight away. Now there's 8 key principles to the GDPR. I went through them in the last video, so I won't go through them again. But your data controller and your data protection officer are responsible for everything. They're responsible for making sure you're recording the right information. You're not using it in ways that the patient has not given you permission to. Your data processors, should you use them, are all up to scratch with the GDPR. That falls solely on the data protection officer's responsibility. And if they foul and they come up short of the regulations, they're answering to the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, and I believe off the top of my head, fines are like 20 million euros or up to 4% of your gross global turnover. So the fines are potentially huge, but as of the May 2018, you've got no excuses of why you shouldn't be GDPR and ticking all the boxes. Okay, so I wanted to give you that. Make sure that you start getting consent from the patient. Make sure you start getting opt-in. Put up the policy in your waiting room with the data protection officer's name on there, how you're using the patient information, whether or not you use any data processors. It's quite a simple subject, guys, and what it boils down to is, if you think about it, I hate receiving emails and marketing that I haven't signed into because somebody sold my information to a third party. It happens all the time. So this is what they're going to stop with the GDPR. It's very good. It's individual for the patients, for us as well. When it's going to really reduce the amount of trash that you receive in your inbox as well. So it's a very good thing. Don't be afraid of it. Just get on board with it. It's a fantastic way of moving things forward for you as individuals, for the patient as individuals, for the practices as well. Because if you've got opt-in to that marketing, it gives you a reason to actually do the marketing. So make sure you're marketing to them there. I think that's all I wanted to cover with you today, and just give you a couple more tips. I hope you find it useful. Once we find out more, we shall get more as well. If you watched the first video, it talks about the right to erasure and why we can keep patient information as well, even if they do ask for it to be erased. So I'm not going to cover that today, but this is just some simple tips that you can put in practice as of today, and don't delay because it comes in May 2018. All right, take care. Have a lovely day. Bye.